Welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe. Today we have a very special guest. He is from Rochester, New York. His name is Mitch Gruber. And the reason I invited him because he wrote a very interesting article for Jewish Telegraph Agency, opinion piece. And I became very interested. So I hope that our viewers will be interested in it as well. Mitch, welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe.
Thank you, and I also hope your viewers are interested.
Well, I'm sure it will be. In any case, Mitch wrote the article, a very interesting article. Let me find it here. It was so interesting. I read it and read it and read it, and now somewhere it disappeared. Sorry. There it is. And the article was entitled, Rochester's Jews Want to Help End Racial Segregation, period. First, we need to acknowledge how we've contributed to it. Mitch, please tell us how Jews contributed to racial segregation in Rochester.
Yeah, thank you for the question, for having me on. And I want to start by saying that the story that I know is the story of Rochester, but my expectation and my understanding is that the story is going to ring true for Jews in cities across the United States. And I'd be curious to know from you or any of the listeners what the equivalent is in Chicago. But I'll tell you the story of Rochester, and I'll tell you my background. First, I'll start there.
Mitch, I'm sorry. Could you please move camera a little bit lower so your face would be up instead of all the way down? So you would be in the middle of... That's good. Yes, continue, please. I apologize.
No, of course. I thought people didn't want to see my face, but here we are. So I wanted to put my background first. I am, as I say in the article, I'm a city council member. I don't know if I'm in Chicago, but I'm the only Jewish elected official in the city of Rochester for sure. And I'm also a historian of our city. I actually have a doctorate in history from the University of Rochester, where I focused on Rochester's history. And so for me, this is the issue that matters most to me, is our city's history and how we got to the point we are today, where we have an incredibly segregated school system, we have incredibly segregated city, and we have major disparities when it comes to health, education, housing, employment, so on and so forth.
I understand that Rochester, New York, is at the almost bottom of all cities in terms of poverty, right?
Yeah, it is. It's we have a really high poverty rate here, and you start to strip that down a little bit further. We also have one of the most, if not the most, segregated school districts in the nation. So, and I'm sure a lot of these things are true of Chicago too. I don't think there's anything that's incredibly exceptional about Rochester. We're a Rust Belt city, just like Chicago is, and a lot of the same problems have ensued over time. But for us, what I'll tell you is that the Jewish community settled along a street called Joseph Avenue. And interestingly, at one point it was called St. Joseph Avenue. And there were so many Jews there that in 1900, they actually appealed to the city council to have them drop the Saint. So it became Joseph Avenue. And that was our version. Again, I don't know Chicago well enough, but that was our version of the Lower East Side, right? That was where all the shuls were. That was where all the delis were. That was where all the fish markets were. That's where Yiddish was spoken. And perhaps most tellingly, that is where the single most important settlement house started by Jews, called Baden Street Settlement House, started by Jews for Jews to basically become to Americanize, to assimilate. This is where all the Jews were, and they turned it into a really lovely but a very...
I apologize. To assimilate or to acculturate?
Yeah, acculturate's the better word. I apologize. That is the better word. And I think the right word is to Americanize. I mean, that was really the task of a lot of the settlement houses. Of course, Chicago and Hull House. That was the first settlement house in the U.S. And these folks from Baden Street were learning from that type of work. So, the Jews were here, including my, the folks who eventually gave way to me, my ancestors. And Joseph Avenue was a wonderful street, but eventually people began to move out, just like we see, white flight in all parts of the country. But the point that I tried to make in the article was that the Jewish community had opportunities that the Black community did not have. And I think the simplest, most clear way that historians have addressed that now is through the GI Bill. My grandfather took advantage of the GI Bill. He served, he came back, he used the GI Bill to take college classes. He used the GI Bill to get a loan on a car, to get a loan on his house. He also, again, we know that from the work of Richard Rothstein in a book called The Color of Law, that so many, even though Jews were written out of certain suburbs, the reality was they eventually got into a lot of suburban places too, and the Black community was left out. So meanwhile, fast forward to 2020, and the Jewish community that I was born into has, I would say, shtettled ourselves in a predominantly white affluent suburb in the east side of town.
What year?
That started really in the 1940s.
No, I mean your grandfather. When did he move?
Oh, he moved sometime in the early 1950s.
So before before the real problem began.
Yeah,
But
and
he got the money for his house before he moved to suburbs.
correct. And I would argue, some people say that the Jews left Joseph Avenue because we had a major uprising, a rebellion. People call it race riots in 1964, but it was really a rebellion around being ghettoized. And some people would say that the rebellion happened, that the Jews left because the rebellion happened. But I think the opposite is true. The rebellion happened because not just the Jews had left, but because these neighborhoods had been divested in for so long. People took the best housing.
I'm sorry, do you mean rebellion of July 26, 1964?
64, correct. 3 days long. It was one of the biggest events of the year. Martin Luther King wrote about it.
Second largest riot after Harlem, few days before.
Yes. Dr. Martin Luther King wrote about it and spoke about it. The Reverend Malcolm X, Malcolm X came to Rochester to make sure people were okay in his community. It was a very, very big, important event. And largely, one of the arguments that people have made that I support is that it's because it was a reflection of how divested these neighborhoods were. Most of the main employment went. The housing stock was deteriorating. The grocery stores and the pharmacies had closed and moved to the suburbs with the wealth.
Where's Oak Hill neighborhood?
Oak Hill?
Yeah.
Oak Hill is a country club in Rochester.
Country club. Not a neighborhood, right?
No, not a neighborhood.
What is the neighborhood which is right next to Joseph Street? I apologize because I've never been to Rochester, so I have to ask these questions.
We should change that sometime. You should come.
Well, if you'd be in Israel, maybe we could talk seriously, but Rochester so far is not on my campus. In any case, but what is the name of the neighborhood right next to Joseph Street?
Well, in fact, it's quite telling. The neighborhoods over there largely don't have neighborhood names. They go by a larger zip code, 14621. So there's a group 14621 that runs the neighborhood association over there. But these neighborhoods have been divested in for so long that in the end, I look around.
But Jews lived in those neighborhoods before 64, right?
Correct. From the time they got here, the second wave of immigration from
and many Europe. Blacks moved in those neighborhoods because Jews were the least resistant element in the city for them.
Well, that's one take. I'm not sure that's what I would say, Alexander.
No, what would you say?
I would say that that there were channels of immigration that were pushing people into certain places where there were things like settlement houses, things like tenements, And so the Jews didn't settle on Joseph Avenue alone. You know, there were also a lot of Eastern European immigrants, Eastern and Southern European, Italian, Polish, were all along that same corridor. And I would say that what happened was, as the Jews built this, as the Jews and other European immigrants built this infrastructure for immigration, settlement houses, tenements, things of that nature, that was a logical place for the Black community to come during the Great Migration when they began to come up north into places like Rochester. So
What I meant to say is that it would be easier for them to move into Jewish neighborhood than to Italian or Lithuanian.
I actually don't think that's what the data would show in Rochester. I don't know about Lithuanian, but I'll tell you there were
In
a lot
Chicago
of
and South Sides, that is the case.
Italian neighborhoods also in the northeast of Rochester that also became predominantly African American communities. But I want
Okay.
to get to the point that I think is really important to make is that I grew up in this eastern suburb called Brighton, which is where the vast majority of Jews live in Rochester. And it's the suburb that has perhaps the best housing stock. It's the suburb that has perhaps the best schools. It's the suburb where the poverty rate is one of the lowest. I now work my day job, other than being on city council, I help to run the food bank here in Rochester. So I work in the poorest of our communities because that is where there is need for things like food pantries, soup kitchens, homeless shelters. I'm on Joseph Avenue almost every day. And the reality is that that community has one of the highest rates of poverty. It has one of the most segregated and bad school districts in the nation, and it has crumbling housing stock. And I'm not
Why is that?
well, it's that way for a lot of reasons, but the point I was making in the article is that the Jewish community had access to opportunities, things like the GI Bill. We had access to opportunities to go accumulate wealth,
It
to
was not
go.
only Jewish community. Everybody who served in American army during the war had it.
It's a bit of a myth, Alexander. I could show you article after article that shows the different ways that the Black community in particular was carved out of the GI Bill. I could show you article after
I'm
article.
aware of it. I'm aware of it. What I meant to say is that among whites who
Yes,
served in the army,
yes.
so why do you distinguish Jews?
I don't. I'd say this is true of all communities. The point of my article was I was speaking to my community here in Rochester, the Jewish community, and talking about the fact that we need to stop turning our backs on the very poor community that we came from.
Are you
And if
telling me? Are you telling me right now you live in largely black neighborhood, right?
me, yes, I do.
Yeah. Uh, yes, it's a small neighborhood. 40% white, right?
My neighborhood?
Yeah.
I don't have the census data in front of me.
No. But your black neighbors are all well educated and have good jobs, right?
No, absolutely not. My neighborhood is one of the poorest neighborhoods. No, sorry, I shouldn't say that. My neighborhood is not. My neighborhood is adjacent to one of the poorest neighborhoods in Rochester. My zip code is the poorest zip code in
I
Rochester.
understand, but I'm talking about the particular area
Yeah.
of that neighborhood uh, is quite well off. It's a small.
No.
No,
What? You just went from saying you don't know anything about Rochester to now telling me that you know who my neighbors are? How did that happen,
I
Alexander?
read your mind.
No, you're completely off here.
Oh.
And
So,
if you come,
are you married, by the way?
I am married.
So you're not afraid to go outside in the evening?
No,
You're not afraid to leave your wife at home?
no,
So it's a safe neighborhood,
I feel safe.
despite the fact that the crime rate in Rochester is one of the highest among cities.
I don't understand the point that you're trying to make here, though. I'd like to try to finish the point of my article, and you could tell me when.
We are talking about your article. We are talking about article. And
Yeah,
we am trying to understand what did Jews do wrong in
I
order to
don't.
cause that poverty. So now they have to make teshuvah.
I don't think the Jews. I don't think my grandfather did anything wrong. Trying to ultimately better his life was not the wrong thing for him to do. That's not the point. And I think so many people, and I hope you're not one of these people, Alexander, but so many people who read the article and commented did so from a place of defensiveness and thought that I was trying to blame individual Jews. That is not the purpose of my article.
I'm sorry,
Hold on,
the article's title is First We Need to Acknowledge How We've Contributed to This Racial Segregation. Now, I
well,
understand that your grandfather left that neighborhood, so he contributed to racial segregation, right?
Alexander, I'm sure you've written articles before, and you know that I did not choose the headline. The
You did
headline
not?
is
Okay.
no, the headline is not something that was
Okay,
written by
so
me.
you did not. My other question is this. You talk about black and brown people, you capitalize black and brown. When you get to white, you write it with lowercase. Why?
So first of all, I'm very happy to say that black as a word is now capitalized in all spaces. Why white was lowercase? You'll have to ask the editor.
What
But
about
I'm really
brown?
curious as
What
to
about brown?
um, what about Brown?
Who are the browns?
Okay, I'm going to ignore your question. I'm going to actually try to finish the point that I was trying to make.
Okay.
This is not about asking people to take personal responsibility and blame. I don't blame my grandfather, Alva Shalom. I do not blame his neighbors. I do not blame the people who moved out of the city to the suburbs either. My point is actually this: if you want to know what I really am trying to get to, I'll tell you. The Jewish community was able to do very well for ourselves. We were able to accumulate wealth. We have, just as I'm sure there is in Chicago, there are charitable foundations. There's work that's being done, and I see all the time the Jewish community is using their charitable dollars to support the Jewish community. And in a city like Rochester, what I would like to see once in a while is for the Jewish community to spread out, to look at where we came from, to understand that actually a stronger Rochester leads to a stronger Jewish community. Our Jewish community here shrinks every year. I don't know if that's the case in Chicago too, but I think in most cities that are the size of Rochester, the community shrinks regularly. And one of the arguments,
Why is that?
well, one of the arguments that I would make is that as Rochester becomes a place with higher poverty rates, worse schools, a lower performing economy, it doesn't matter that in Brighton, where my mother lives, is still a wonderful place to be. The reality is that when you have a 28-year-old new Jewish doctor who's looking to settle somewhere, they don't look to Rochester because they see the statistics are as bad as they are.
Isn't it reasonable?
It is. And my point is, we as a Jewish community in Rochester need to start to think about the larger Rochester community. We need to see Joseph Avenue, which is one of the poorest streets in our city. We need to make that street stronger. We need to lift up
How?
that by beginning to invest back in it.
Really? But
Yes.
Jews invested in that street and that neighborhood and were driven out by black crime.
No, I would argue that that's exactly what I said is not the case. I would say that the Jews left, and that is one of the reasons why there was an uprising in 1964, not other way around.
According to what I read, and according to WTTW, which is Chicago-based public TV radio station, the major demographic change took place right after and as a result of the 1964 riots.
That's great. You want me to share with you some other information when we're done with the call about what the actual causation was? I think anyone who studies history understands there's never something as simple as causation like that. It wasn't the riots happened and therefore everyone left. The reality was that this neighborhood had been divested in for years and years and years. And right now there is an old shul on Joseph Avenue that people are trying to turn into an arts and culture center. I want to see the Jewish community invest in a project like that. I want to see the Jewish community help to build affordable housing. I want to see the Jewish community build a health center.
I support you 100% on all of those desires. But my question to you is this. Recently in New Jersey, several black fully armed guys tried to kill a bunch of Jews. And the black community there widely supported them, saying they're against gentrification. What are you proposing? You're proposing a gentrification by Jews of Rochester?
No, that's not what I'm proposing, Alexander.
What are you proposing?
What I'm proposing is for the resources from the Jewish community to begin to go back into Joseph Avenue. That doesn't mean that it has to be done by the Jews, by themselves, in a way that ultimately feels like it's not part of the community. I think there's opportunities for community engagement, for building projects together. That's what needs to be done. And if I have anything to do with it, that's what will be done.
Well, you are doing it, but let me ask you a question. If I lived in a suburb and I'd be a Jew, as I am, and I would look at somebody at Rochester telling me that I should, move back to Rochester?
No, I'm not saying that the Jewish people should move back to Joseph Avenue. I'm not asking anyone to move where they don't want to move. I'm not telling anyone they should uproot their families and go X, Y, or Z places. I'm talking about resources, Alexander. I'm talking
So
specifically
giving money.
about cash money.
Uh,
Yes.
Jews have contributed to black defense organizations, starting from NAACP and including Black Panthers and on and on and on and on. What was the result? Did they ever get thank you from blacks?
These are questions that I don't understand what you're angling at, but I'm gonna again ignore your question about who got thanks from who, and I'm instead going to answer something that's more specific. And what I think is really important, I hope you listen. You don't have to, but I hope you listen to this. Here's the reality. 3 of the 10 biggest housing developers in the greater Rochester area are Jewish-owned companies. They are nice companies. I have no problem with them. I work with them on a regular basis. They accumulated wealth while the communities that they were helping to build ultimately were not diverse, integrated places. In other words, they made millions and millions and millions of dollars off a broken system. All I'm saying is it's time to go back into Joseph Avenue, to put some of that money in there, to rebuild housing and do it with the community that's there.
But it seems to me what you said, they're private companies, right?
There are private companies who oftentimes have charitable trusts to spend on Jewish issues.
Yeah. From what I see, most of the Jewish donations by Jews go to non-Jewish causes today. By far.
Yeah.
I mean, out of major Jewish donors to various causes, I count maybe no more than 10% they're giving to Jewish causes, and the 90% they're giving to non-Jewish causes. So what do you want? 99%?
That doesn't seem like a very scientific statistic you just gave me, Alexander.
This is my feeling when I look at this and this and this and this and this, and they right there, we give this to this, etc.
I'm not talking about individual donations. I don't know what, I don't feel like I'm making myself clear. I'm talking about companies that have.
Please, you're a PhD and you're representative of the people. You need to be able to express yourself clearly.
Apparently I can't. I'm not talking about individual donations. I'm not talking about you writing a check for double chai and sending it to a place that's not a Jewish cause. Okay. I'm talking about the fact that we have, just like I'm sure in Chicago, if I Googled right now, Jewish foundations, I bet you there are millions and millions and millions of dollars in Chicago's Jewish community in a foundation that is governed largely by the Jewish community that goes into Chicago's Jewish community or goes into Israel. The same is true here in Rochester. And I'm suggesting to you that those foundations, if they're going to build stronger communities, they need to invest back on whatever the version of Joseph Avenue is in their communities as well. That's my point.
Okay, so write them a letter.
Yeah,
or you want to stage a riot instead.
Thank you for your advice, Alexander. I'll handle my own processes for this.
I mean, you are asking people to act on your calls. First of all, you're asking them to feel bad about it because they have contributed to this racial division. I do not see how they contributed. Running away from criminals is not a contribution to separation. It's a proper, reasonable act. Don't you think so?
I think that your premise is frankly faulty. No one ran away from criminals, and
no one ran away from criminals?
Alexander,
that's not what happened in Chicago on South Side and West Side.
Brushing an entire community with the stroke of criminals is a disgusting thing to do, and I think I'm ready for this phone call to be over.
My pleasure. We'll do as you say, Mitch.
Okay, thank you. Have a good night.
I thought that you were going to be able to stand up and defend yourself.